Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Thriving Relationship Show. I am your host, Christine Eartheart, founder of the Center for Thriving Relationships. And I am so grateful and thrilled to have you here and to get to support you in experiencing more love, connection, and understanding in your relationships. And if you are in a romantic relationship or a relationship of any kind, you have probably experienced emotions like anger or emotions that just felt messier and you weren't quite sure what to do with it. You are in the right place, because who we have with us today is someone who I have known for many years, who I love with all my heart. We were in a women's circle actually for many, many years, and she helps people navigate anger in a way that I trust and support and admire as much as anyone I've ever met. And you will find that she is someone who is so deeply empathetic and kind and caring. And she has this incredible TEDx talk all about mindful anger. She is a superstar and the embodiment of living authentically and from the heart, setting boundaries that are healthy and bring out the best in everyone. And she also has this exquisite intuition, and we're going to explore how they're all connected, how to navigate anger in a way that honors you and everyone involved, that is healthy and productive and effective, and how that helps you actually access your intuition and have much healthier, much more thriving relationships. So Juna, welcome to the Thriving Relationship Show. Juna is a somatic experiencing practitioner, a coach, intuitive, and educator. Over the last 15 years, she has supported her clients and students to develop greater emotional awareness, create healthier relationships, and increase resilience and overall well-being. She has a deep passion for helping people listen to their body's wisdom and grow healthier boundaries so they can experience their fullest potential. And we will be sure to link to her TEDx talk, because I can't recommend highly enough. I actually was so honored and lucky I was in the audience when she was giving it. And I'm just so grateful, Juna, to have you here and for the countless ways that your love has been just a source of support and constant inspiration in my life. So welcome.
Thank you, Christine. So happy to be here. And just even as you said that you were in the audience, it's just like that just reminded me, like, you helped me actually even get that TEDx talk, and I got to fly to Indiana and then just to feel your support of you and Brett, that was so amazing. So thank you. That was just such a game-changing moment in my life. And yeah, and I'm just so happy to be here today.
Yeah, so in all of you, whenever I get to see your light shining. So can you share with us more about what inspired you to get into mindful anger and living authentically, and how that ties into having healthy relationships?
Well, big question. I think what inspired me to get into all of it was actually having some very unhealthy relationships with myself, with my own anger and boundaries. And then that got translated into a pretty unhealthy relationship I got into in my late 20s, where I was just kind of perpetually fawning, people pleasing my partner, collapsing my own boundaries. And this partner, in my experience of it, he pretty much took advantage of that. And it turned out to be a pretty psychologically abusive and unhealthy relationship. And about 3.5 years in, I started to experience an uprising of anger in my body. But because I didn't have a relationship with my own anger, I didn't even know what I was feeling in the relationship was anger. I just started to have acid reflux and my jaw and shoulders and this like feeling in my body like I was a volcano that was about to erupt. Like all of it was so uncomfortable. And I finally summoned the courage to break up with this partner, thinking that these feelings would go away, but they didn't. And that's one of the quote unquote gifts of anger, is that, you know, in my experience, it doesn't fully go away until we really face it and ourselves. And I had to really do some deeper work around really seeing that my anger was coming forward to show me not just that relationship was out of alignment, but that the way that I had been doing life by overly people pleasing was out of alignment. So it was a many year journey with my relationship with anger where I resisted it and wanted to push it away. And then when I finally turned towards it and embraced it and saw it as an ally, I really was shown this big old mirror that was helping me see myself at a next level. And thus began my journey of helping people befriend this fiery, intense, uncomfortable emotion and create healthier relationship with it. And that can be a massive support in how we navigate close relationships, how we deal with conflict. So there's a lot more I could say about all of that, but that's just a little brief summary of my own personal journey there.
Thank you so much for sharing that and for allowing your own painful, just difficult situation to be turned into this amazing healing for the world. I just honor you so deeply. That is like the ultimate healer is someone who has done their own healing work. And oh my goodness, you have. And can we just like share with people? So you talked about, I know you explained kind of the stuffers and the eruptors. So what does it look like? Let's start with when we don't have a healthy relationship with anger. What might that feel like? Like you did such a beautiful job articulating what it might feel like in the body, but just for people to identify if maybe our relationship with anger isn't optimal, how might it appear?
Well, a quote that I share in my TEDx talk is that anger is like a child. Most of us end up letting it drive the car. We shove it in the trunk, and you don't want to do that with a child. Can't let it drive the car because it will drive us off the road, and you can't shove it in the trunk because it will die. And so we need to have create a healthier relationship with it. But because there isn't enough support out there, we don't learn, at least when I was a kid, I didn't learn emotional intelligence in school. I've heard that it's a little different now, but that a lot of us do these unhealthy things with it. We either let it drive the car, which I call erupting, or we shove it in the trunk, which I call stuffing. So anger comes up, and habitually we just either erupt with it, we throw things, we yell, we send off that nasty text. So it's all erupting. Or we stuff it in the trunk, which can look like fawning, like people pleasing, like morphing it into sadness, collapsing into depression, shoving it into our bodies. So it kind of ends up looking like self-loathing. There's all sorts of clever things we do with it when we're stuffers. So those are the two main things people do when they typically have an unhealthy relationship with anger. And one last thing I'll just say is that a lot of us think of an unhealthy relationship with anger as just the erupting thing. But the stuffing thing is just as unhealthy. And research has actually shown this can create even more health issues when we stuff it. And I think we know that now with all the autoimmune issues and all sorts of other things that have flared up.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for clarifying those two. So I imagine most people have a sense in different moments that we have a tendency, right, probably to go more into the stuffing or more into the erupting. And I love that quote about the car. That just sums up so much. And so how healthy anger? So anger is inevitable, right? Is there a human on the planet that doesn't feel anger? I imagine not. And so it's an absolutely valuable feeling for us to have. And so can you share more about why is it healthy and how do we express it in a healthy way?
Yeah. Well, I first will give a little disclaimer, which is, and I like to say this, I don't want to pedestalize anger. I think it's really important as you start to form a relationship with it that you have a like healthy perspective and like distance from it too, because it is a really fiery emotion. Of all the emotions, it catapults us into action. It compels us to move towards whatever we're angry at. And so I think creating a relationship with it where we do respect it and also know that it's a bit of a wild card, I think is really important. But healthy anger, I mean, in my experience with this emotion, there's so many benefits to creating a healthier relationship with it. Again, if I just go to the analogy thing, instead of letting it drive the car, instead of shoving it in the trunk, the visual I like to take on around healthy anger is that this little kid is now sitting in the backseat of the car. maybe in its little like toddler chair, it has a seatbelt on. It can yell, it can scream, it can even inform how I'm driving or where I'm going, but it's not driving the car. And so I'm learning to be with it in my own body. I'm learning to feel it. It can even inform how I speak or what I share, but it's strapped in the back, and but it's here with me. And so healthy anger from that standpoint can help us connect to our power. It can illuminate our boundaries, our no. If there's been a boundary trespassed in some way, it can step forward to say, this is not okay. And maybe I've passed my own boundary, or someone else has. It can illuminate things that we care about. So things that are not okay going on in the world with social justice movements or the environment, it will come forward and say, no, you need to take a stand. And so it can inspire action. And the other cool thing about anger is it can help us heal our trauma. And that's been a huge experience for me in my own journey with working with trauma, is that when I can actually engage my fight response that was previously thwarted back in that traumatic event, and I can engage it in this healthy way, I actually come more online with myself.
So good. Thank you so much, Juna. So would you be willing to share a little bit more? So how would someone do this? So if anger can really be the gateway to us getting clear on something that isn't working for us, or something that's incongruent with our values, or if a boundary's been crossed, what are your suggestions? So someone notices like anger is coming up, what's next?
Yeah, I mean, I think even I'd say the very first thing is starting to notice the cues of anger arising. And again, if you're an erupter, that might be a little easier, because it's like, ooh, there's this heat, tension in my body, and I'm starting to feel my fists get tight, jaws tight, and I want to just say that thing. But for stuffers, this can be a little bit more complicated, because maybe for a lot of stuffers, the anger in a millisecond morphs into sadness. And so all they know is I'm sad right now. Or in a millisecond, the anger is morphed into collapse or depression or freeze. And so in that case, for stuffers, I would just say, when something comes up, when you get triggered or there's a reaction here, just get curious. And I'll just say, just maybe even just ask the question, I wonder if I'm actually angry right now. So that very first step for erupters or stuffers, and by the way, there's a lot of people who are a mixture of both, is just starting to get curious if I'm actually angry right now, and then noticing the signs and symptoms of anger. So acid reflux, tight jaw, tight shoulders, tight arms, heat in our belly, all those can be body cues, body flags indicating anger. A second thing to do is just see if you can take some deep breaths and just connect with your body, connect with your experience before erupting with your anger and before stuffing it. Just like say, I'm angry right now, without any judgment. And then a third thing, and again, there's so many more tools, but to simplify this, a third thing is just asking ourselves, what does my anger most want me to know right now? And I really do believe we can dialogue with any of our emotions. And so that ability just to again, get curious, which slows everything down, and just ask, what is my anger trying to tell me? What does it want me to know right now? Oh, that I don't want to go out to dinner tonight. I need to stay home and get a good night's sleep. Or, hey, that thing that my partner said was really not okay, and I need to communicate that to them. So it's a boundary. So that's also just that inquiry piece, I think, is really valuable at the end.
So good. So yeah, tuning into our bodies and familiarizing ourselves with what anger actually, what it looks like. Those are great descriptions that you gave. Those are certainly common ones. And just turning towards it with our breath and with curiosity about what it needs. It really is just speaking up, this friendly messenger trying to get our attention. here to share something really, really vital, ultimately, to our well-being. So thank you so much for that. And how about in our relationships? What do you find happens when we're not healthily expressing our anger? So whether we're erupting, what are some of the things that you see happen in relationships? And when we're stuffing, how does it actually impact us when we're in relationships of any kind? Again, I find it just so helpful to name what it is because we are adaptive creatures. So it's so easy to have some of these less than optimal patterns in our lives and not even realize we're in them. So yeah, thanks for helping us wake up to what might be able to be even better in our lives and relationships.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of in our relationships, anger can show up. I'm sure people listening to this can relate. It can show up in a whole variety of ways. We're hardwired for connection. We're truly hardwired for connection. And so for some of us, again, more of the stuffers, if anger comes up, we can stuff our own anger because we want to maintain the connection at all costs. And so what that can look like is maybe if our partner's getting angry, we immediately, again, it's like it happens in a millisecond on autopilot. We can find ourselves people pleasing and collapsing our own boundaries and fawning. And that can be a dynamic. I mean, I'm sure you've seen this with couples too. I can't even tell you how many couples I've worked with over the years that there typically is one person who's more of the conflict avoidant person in the relationship. Sometimes you get two conflict avoidant people. Usually there's one who's more the conflict avoidant and one who's a little bit more the erupter. And the conflict avoidant person kind of bends and collapses boundaries and wants to make the other person's emotions calm down because they're having trouble being with their own feelings. And the erupter maybe gets more of their way. And it's like almost like this unconscious contract dynamic that we just get into, and then it works for a while until it really doesn't work. But that's something I've seen with a lot of couples. I think something else that can happen is that there are some ways that when anger comes up, and we don't have skills to navigate it well, it can really damage and hurt a relationship. We can say really hurtful things that it can be hard to come back from. It can be hard to repair from those things. And so I've also seen that a lot in relationships. And I've even done that, with my ex-husband. I'd spent my whole life being a stuffer, and then I did the pendulum swing to finally opening to a lifetime of anger that was in here. And I started to erupt at him quite consistently. And it wasn't physically violent ever, but my words were violent. There was ways that I was mean and cruel. And he was more of the conflict avoidant person in our relationship. And so he kind of kept trying to stabilize me and not rock the boat. And then at a certain breaking point, he was just like, I can't handle this anymore. I'm done. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure you've seen it too. Like anything you want to share that you've seen in terms of couples and how they navigate anger in a relationship and how that expresses?
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing that. And what I certainly I found in my own relationships and working with couples and people in just relationships of all kinds is that it doesn't go away. So if we don't honor it and speak up for whatever wants to get our attention, it will come out sideways. So sometimes we'll see couples when someone has just disconnected so much from their partner, or they have a lot of contempt or resentment that is built up because they've gone so long overriding their own needs, overriding their own feelings to appease their partner. And now their partner is also confused sometimes. Like, I thought everything was okay with you, because it's just gone so long with things piling up. So it's not too late. Oftentimes it is the moment to really learn how to access that and then how to express it in a way that our partner can really hear. So yeah, so much of what you've shared. And I find it really fascinating, just the dance of partnership and how each unique relationship kind of brings out different parts of ourselves. And so I'm curious if you found this too, that if we're with someone who is an erupter, we can easily go into people pleasing, or we can go into bending to, or fawning. Whereas if someone is this really safe space, they're very peaceful, their tendency is more to be a stuffer, that our anger is more easily expressed with them. Because it's interesting, I definitely lean more into stuffing, or I just go to like my meditation practice and I tap and I like try to do all the things on my own so that I don't need to express it to someone else. And one of the things I've learned in life that I'm so grateful for, that I'm sure has been inspired by our friendship, is that there are some things that there's like no amount of meditation or prayer or journaling that will fully resolve it. Like I need to take the action with the other person, which can sometimes feel like the scariest thing to do, is to actually have the conversation and acknowledge what isn't working and acknowledge what our needs are. And so I just love that so much, is that, sometimes what anger requires of us can feel like the scariest thing to do. And it's like the only thing that's going to really honor it and allow us to feel that sense of peace again. Otherwise, I find that it just continues to, let itself be known and will come out in some way until we let it be heard.
Yeah, you said something in there, especially, with this last piece, and something else you said just reminded me something that I learned when I was studying with Katie Hendricks for many years. Which I think I met you at Hendricks.
Yes.
Pretty amazing. But she talked about when you withhold, meaning you don't speak your truth or speak that boundary or share, hey, that thing you said hurt me or made me feel angry. When you withhold, then you start to withdraw, then you start to project. And what I would tack on to the end is that then you start to exit. And you might exit the relationship physically, or you exit emotionally. So you might stay in the relationship, but there's a wall now between you and your partner. And so that ability, like you said, to communicate the hard thing, even though it's scary, even though it's uncomfortable, is everything. And it doesn't necessarily mean you always communicate it in the moment, because you might. And sometimes it is really important to communicate in the moment, but sometimes communicating in the moment might be too hard. And so you maybe feel into it. And then when you're a little bit more grounded and less reactive, you come back to your partner and say, hey, I notice I feel really angry right now. And so you're speaking to versus from your emotion. And I notice I also feel hurt. And here's what happened. And, you can hold a boundary. Hey, and X, Y, and Z wasn't okay with me. But that ability to step forward, and it takes vulnerability, it takes emotional intelligence, it takes courage, but that ability to step forward and say the thing is so important. And that's something that really does come up in my current partnership, where I now get angry almost every day with my current partner. And I smile because I kind of like love it. Like there's a way that I have now a healthier relationship with anger, where my own anger, I feel connected to myself when anger comes up, and I have the ability to express it in a healthy way for the most part, like 98% of the time. With my partner. There's been some instances even lately where it was not healthy, and I was like, oh my gosh, I teach this stuff and how come this is happening right now? But yeah.
Oh, yes, the real human experience. And how wonderful. You are so attuned to just the breadth of like feelings that we can have on any given day in an hour, all the feelings that we can experience. I love that you're so caught up with your feelings and what's there. So thanks for.
And I think that's like the authenticity thing, is like really to be in a relationship and be authentically ourselves, which is at its core all we really want anyway, because we all actually do want intimacy. Like that authenticity piece means being willing to feel what I'm feeling in the moment and being willing to express it, communicate about it, not withhold it, not withdraw.
Yeah. So let's talk about authenticity. Tell me about your love of authenticity.
Yeah. I mean, I think again, being a people pleaser naturally, and a anger stuffer, and just a stuffer of any uncomfortable emotion that wasn't rainbows and unicorns. Authenticity was not my superpower. And it was actually in the Hendricks Institute when I was in that apprenticeship training that I pretty much got called out for being more of a 3 on the Enneagram, wearing masks that were the socially acceptable masks and not being more of my true self. And that really was like the door that opened my fascination with this authenticity thing. And I kept trying to figure out, how do I do authenticity? Like, how do I do it? And it was something you do. And so I started just with learning to feel feelings. And for me, the feelings that I had avoided were fear and anger and grief and pain and trauma. And so just when those feelings came up, and I know I said this earlier, but just like growing that little muscle of curiosity as opposed to the habitual muscle of aversion, like just pausing when feelings were here and just being like, oh, anger's here. Oh, grief is here. Can I just take a breath and be with this and be curious about it? And what is it trying to communicate to me, about my experience? And then sometimes the emotion would flow all the way through, or sometimes it would take me deeper. But that really opened me for the first time in my life to learning to be in my own body, learning to actually be here. And it was so cool after my 3 years in the Hendricks work to have people come up to me and be like, "You're so authentic." I was like, "Really? Oh, that's so awesome," because I just heard for 3 years that I was kind of not. So there was something happening, and my experience, just to tie this back full circle to relationships, is again, the more that we can be our true selves with another person, the more we experience this intimacy thing. And the more we experience this like true love thing, which I'll also add is like probably one of the scariest things in the world to me. And it's what I want more than anything. And I'm still very much in learning the art and practice of authenticity. It feels like it, as Brene Brown says, it's really a daily practice. It's really a daily practice. So, yeah, that's a little bit there around authenticity.
Thank you so much. So, yes, just beginning with being honest with ourselves, it sounds like, with what we're really feeling and letting there be space for it to be here rather than just having that reflex of pushing it down or judging it or resisting it, whatever it might be. Like, all of us is welcome here. And first, like learning to really be with all of it. So beautiful. And how did you find that your relationships changed? I love that you were getting that mirrored back to you. Like, you're so authentic. So wonderful. And yeah, what did you notice was different in your romantic relationships now that you have like the level of authenticity that you do, and just relationships of all kinds? Or what do you see with clients once they're willing to practice that level of vulnerability and really cultivate an ability to express whatever is authentic for them in a way their partner can hear? Like, what shifts?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much that shift. I know myself included, a lot of us are afraid that if we bring our true self forward or even share some of the hard things, that our partner won't want to receive us, that our partner will turn away from us. And there's something I want to say to that, which is like, if someone doesn't want your true self, then you probably don't want them anyway. And I know that can be really hard and complicated to fully disentangle from a marriage or a relationship, but it's not worth it staying with someone who doesn't want the real you, period. And in my experience in my current partnership, like truly for the first time ever, I'm with a partner who values truth, aka authenticity, more than maybe even I do. Like, he is such a warrior, a truth warrior. And that even means that sometimes he says things and I'm like, oh, I can't believe he just said that. But my value now at this point is truth over discomfort. Like I'm more interested in truth than I am in avoiding my own discomfort. And so that's been where things have kind of shifted in the hierarchy for me. And so even if he says something and it hurts, I know he said it with love. It's not like he'll say really mean things, but he'll say things and I'm like, yes, that hurts, but thank you. Because I trust you even more now for speaking this truth. And so there's a way that I've never in my life had a relationship with this level of trust in it, because there's nothing we're not willing to talk about. We're very transparent with each other. And we are consistently in the art of like, and this practice of like, what else can I reveal to myself and to you? And it feels truly like a lifelong journey. This is a journey.
Mm.
And just to add to your like the last thing you said is like, what's the impact? The impact is like, I'm finally in a relationship that like my young parts really feel safe in. And I feel like sexually, I'm finally able to really open in this connection. And I feel like my heart is able to open. And so there's like, when there's true safety, when there's a foundation of like true authenticity, we start to feel safe, and trauma can begin to heal, and our young parts can really start to come forward. And so it's been ironic because I feel like now that there's this much safety, there's been like a whole next level of trauma that surfaced. And you're kind of like, what, really? But I think that's part of the gift of it too. So that's that last piece I'll just add there on a plug for those of you listening that are kind of like, what's the benefit of this? There's so many benefits.
I love that it just allows parts of us. I mean, that's, I think, the gift of relationship, and a healthy, healing relationship, is that these younger parts of us get to finally come to the surface and be met in a way that they long to be met, and weren't before. And so you and Matt are such an incredible couple, and says so much that he's able to meet you and maybe even stretch you into new levels of vulnerability and authenticity. And I just witness you, and your love just grows deeper and deeper and deeper through it. And so a piece of that is knowing how to really hold space for our partner. And oh my gosh, that's been one of my greatest learnings in my relationship with Brett, is like how to be with our beloved's feelings and noticing where we go, like, oh no, like for me, my listening filter be like, oh no, I've done something wrong. And to like get out of that and just let there be wide open space for him to have the fullest expression. And I'm just like passionately curious about what it's like to be him, and put my energy towards just fully bearing witness. Certainly while noticing, right, what comes up for us, because there's good material for growth there. And I think it's a skill we can really develop, is how to hold space for our partner in all of their feelings without whatever we do, trying to quiet it, making it wrong, analyzing it, thinking that it's about us and we must have done something wrong, wherever we tend to have our default places to go. And so any wisdom or insights to share with people. So if a couple is listening and they're like, okay, we want to maybe make a little more space for whether it be anger or just some of the other emotions maybe there hasn't been space for, and to share more vulnerably and authentically, what do you recommend as far as like creating a container for that and really holding space for one another and being equipped to receive whatever our partner might long to share with us?
Great question. I mean, I think number one is getting an agreement, like setting the context with your partner of, hey, babe, I want to make space in our relationship for us to have more of our feelings without us kind of going to these default strategies where I try to people please your feelings away or fix your feelings. I want there to be space for us both to have our feelings and not try to make each other wrong or fix each other when those feelings come up. as a path towards more intimacy, as a path towards more individual authenticity that really can feed the relationship. So you kind of set the context, because sometimes if you just start doing these things, your partner might be like, what are you
Totally.
doing? And then number two, really practicing it. I actually learned recently that it takes, I think, 400 repetitions of something to create a new synapse in the brain. But when that same thing is done in play, it takes only 10 to 20 repetitions. That is so cool. So sometimes something that I do with couples is I'll be like, we're going to just do a role play right now. Like, we're not even going to wait until you get really triggered by something she said. We're going to actually practice this art of allowing each other to have our feelings in a role play. So I'm going to have you forget to take out the garbage tonight, and you pretend you're really mad about it. And so we'll do a role play, and we'll just take some deep breaths. And even just a role play will activate a physiological response, some of those sensations and feelings, and we'll just practice the art of, I'm going to just allow you to have your feelings and try to stay curious and try not to fix them, try not to make them wrong, and make space. So active listening can be a really powerful tool, just like, oh, how is that for you? What are you noticing? And tell me more. Is there anything else you want to share before we go into that fix or make wrong story that we can tend to go into? That practice of active listening is huge. Another thing we can do is just learn to befriend all our feelings in our own body. So again, if my partner is angry and I am having such a hard time being with their anger, it's usually an indicator that I am having a hard time being with my own anger. And so can I just take some deep breaths and just say, it's all going to be okay. It's all okay. I don't have to fix them. They're going to be okay. This isn't the end of the world. They're just angry right now. And I just kind of soothe those young parts of me that are maybe feeling afraid. And maybe do some inner work to befriend my own anger. So those, just think if there's any other main ideas. I guess the last thing I'll just say is, and this happens with my partner, Matt, where sometimes he gets really upset and triggered by something I said or did. And I feel like it triggers then a part of me, like you said, that where I feel really bad, like I did something wrong and I now need to fix it, or otherwise he's going to break up with me. And so what I try to do in the moment is I'll just name, wow, I notice a part of me wants to make your bad feelings go away right now and wants to say or do something to make your feelings go away. And I'm going to actually do the thing that I know you need right now, which is just give you space. And so I'll just name for myself and for him what I'm noticing I want to do without doing it. And, the wisdom of that is when we can just name our experience in the moment, it helps that prefrontal cortex come back online, which can be helpful. So that also can be another tool you can use.
Oh, I love these so much, Juna. Yeah, being able just to witness whatever is arising without thinking that we need to direct it at somebody or act it out or just unconsciously, react from that place. So such a skill. And we just encourage anyone to really learn communication tools, like learning how to listen and learning how to speak about what we're feeling, like how you are demonstrating. And I've just found that to be so transformative in being able to have the more difficult conversation, to know how to speak it in a way that is healthier and will actually allow us to have a deeper connection on the other side. And learning how to listen, it is so liberating to be able to hold space for all of it and to know that it's all really invaluable information if we want to have the greatest relationship possible in life. So thank you so much for sharing concrete things. So how about boundaries? I know that's another area of passion and connected to being authentic and, expressing our anger. How do you find that boundaries show up in relationships? Why is it so important to set them, and how do we do that in a way that really honors both people? Anything that you want to say about boundaries?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many different avenues that boundary shows up in a relationship. There can be time and space boundaries. There can be physical, like physical touch boundaries that we might have. There can be agreements that we need to make. And those are certain kinds of boundaries. There's infinite ways that boundaries need to be erected in a relationship. And the thing with boundaries that's really important is that, and the analogy I like to use is that, if you're walking down the street and you see a fence wrapped around a house, which is a boundary, you also maybe would see a sign saying, do not trespass, violators will be prosecuted. And so that's a very clear boundary. It's a physical boundary, and it's also a verbal one with a consequence. But then us human beings, we're not a house with a fence. We don't have a wall around us. We don't also walk around with a sign over us. And so we need to use our voice to communicate our boundaries. And then we also need to have consequences. If people trespass or things trespass those boundaries, there needs to be a consequence. Otherwise, it's just a wavering empty sign, in the wind. It's like, it doesn't have any power behind it. And so that's one thing I often see in relationships is someone will say, well, I communicated my boundary and I communicated again and I communicated it again. But if there's no consequence, then your boundary has no weight. It has no power. And the person will know that you're just going to collapse your boundary again and again. And that can be really scary, because setting a boundary is scary, and then actually having consequences if the person doesn't honor the boundary can be really scary. You can lose the connection. The person could get mad at us. They can bash us on social media. Who knows? And so I think that boundaries are, I think in relationships, just to circle back to your original question, in relationships, we need to learn that skill of even knowing that we've had a boundary come up, which sometimes we don't even know it until the body contracts or we start to feel irritation, which I call is anger light. So irritation, frustration, annoyance are all possibly an indicator that there's been a boundary that you haven't communicated or that someone has trespassed.
Wonderful. And can you give some examples of boundaries? That's right. It's not just a physical boundary that somebody has crossed. If someone's maybe not used to actually seeing things through the lens of like, oh, that was like an emotional boundary, or my partner had an opinion about something and that felt like a boundary. They're suddenly nitpicking all these things about what I do. Like, it can show up in so many different ways. So just to give people maybe a larger context for understanding boundaries, you're such an incredible teacher about them. So yeah, what would be some examples of boundaries in relationships?
Yeah, I'll just think to my own relationship. One of them is just how we talk about our partner to other people. What we disclose about our partner's private experiences to other people. That could be a boundary. How we touch our partner sexually. The physical, when they want physical touch, or when they want sexual touch, or when they want sensual touch. Like, there can be all these boundaries that we can have around even just touch. Let's see, what are some other boundaries? It's always hard when you're put on the spot. What are some other boundaries? Maybe you can think of some with me.
Yeah, I wonder if somebody has a dream or something that's really, really important to them, and that they're wanting to protect, and their partner is coming in with all of their maybe naysaying, all of their own fears, but all of their opinions, all of their judgments about it, so might want to protect a boundary around something that's really important to them. That would be an example. Yeah, and I think just even the boundaries of letting us be who we uniquely are. It's really easy, I think, when we enter into partnership that the lines get blurred, where I end and you begin. And there's a beautiful part of this, and it's so understandable because our partner impacts us more than anybody else. And it can get really confusing. So in the blurring of that, I found that it's really easy for us to have opinions about everything our partner says or does or doesn't do or doesn't say. And so that can be a boundary. It can be a really healthy boundary because really it's not bringing out the best in either one of us when we're, just loading out all of these opinions rather than just being, in awe of their own one of a kind way of doing things. And so that's certainly one, because that tends to be a passion killer. And then we end up more in kind of a parental role of each other, or we just feel like, oh, I need space because I'm losing myself in this relationship. And so in order to preserve my connection to myself, I need to take a step away from you.
So I'm so glad you brought that one forward, because I think that's just, it's such an important one. And you're absolutely right. Like the longer that we're in relationships, it can just be easy to kind of start to insert our own beliefs, values, ideas onto our partner and not recognize that they're their own person. And so that ability to say like, hey, that's your opinion, or that's your belief, or that's where you want to go to dinner tonight. And I maybe have a different opinion and I want it to be heard, or I need to feel my own sovereignty in this connection. So I think that is such a huge one. And another one is just like how we communicate to each other. Like we can have boundaries around just communication. Like, hey, it's actually not okay to yell at me. It's not okay to call me bad names. Like, actually, I have a boundary there. Yeah. And for me, that's actually like a non-negotiable. If I had a partner that was yelling at me and saying like really hurtful things to me consistently, I'm done. Like, that's not okay. And some people have built a tolerance for that. And then also, yeah, just how, like, if we talk down to each other with contempt, like, those are things that happen in a relationship, and you can hold a boundary with those things. I think it's really important.
Yeah, those are such great examples. I love that saying that like we get the life that we're willing to tolerate, or the patterns in relationships. And while there are some areas of life that, building our tolerance can be a really wonderful and healthy thing. In this regard, like if we have a high tolerance for drama or a high tolerance for contempt or shaming or judging or blaming, then, we're going to be allowing and inviting all those things in without any sort of consequence. Those are really good things to have boundaries around, to treat each other with respect, with adoration, with kindness, to value one another's feelings and needs, all of those things. So I'm curious, what would be like an example of a consequence? So say someone set a boundary and their partner, in their own just pursuit of this pattern, what would be something to give them the cue, like, oh no, that I really mean it, like that really doesn't work for me?
I mean, that can happen. A consequence can happen as words. It can happen with our tone, like you can even convey a consequence with like, hey, the way you just spoke to me was truly not okay. And so you don't even need to say anything. It's like a consequence. It's almost just like, I am holding with an energetic and verbal boundary, like, no. I think there's also a way that you can say, wow, a consequence can be, you can share a consequence from a more vulnerable place. Like, wow, what you said at the dinner table about me really hurt me. And I notice that I want to pull away from you right now. Or I notice that I'm going to take a little space and I'm going to sleep in a different room tonight because that was not okay. And so you can hold that kind of boundary of like taking space or letting them know with your, that your physical body doesn't want to be close to their physical body right now. You're going to take some space. You can set a consequence by saying like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to go to that certain kind of, event with you anymore because that really didn't feel good. Or your friends aren't welcome in our house if they talk that way to me, or they get really drunk and throw a wild party or steal things, like there's those kinds of boundaries that can happen as well. And I think, what I also try to do now with boundaries is see if my boundaries, I can communicate them from a more vulnerable place. like, wow, I notice, like the one I think I previously said, like, I notice I feel really hurt and I notice I want to pull away. And so I'm even like naming what I notice I want to do with my boundary as a little like, hey, if you do that thing, then the next boundary might be I am pulling away.
Yeah. Oh, so lovely. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think it's so important. I'm actually so grateful when Brett reinforces a boundary. Like anytime he's done that, it helps me wake up to the impact of my actions, my words. And if there wasn't, if he didn't give me some sort of signal, I could kind of unconsciously keep doing the thing that isn't working for him. So I'm actually so grateful when he lets me know, like, no, because it brings me back to my center and how I actually want to show up for him. So I think when done consciously, it is like truly a way that it helps us all just realign with like being our best selves for one another and being our authentic selves for each other. So maybe one final question, because I imagine when someone's hearing this, we are such proponents of secure attachment and things like leaning in a relationship and getting willing, right? The number one predictor of divorce is someone's unwillingness to accept influence from their partner. So I think in order to have a thriving relationship, I found we want to really pair like these boundaries and being authentic with also being willing to really lean in and soften and hear our partner's heart and value their needs. And so where do you find if someone's like, well, I don't know if my partner's just going to start setting all these boundaries. Like, I'm not going with you to the in-laws. Nope, I don't want to do that. That's a boundary for me. And like, nope, you can't tell me how you feel. So there's all these things in balance, because if we're just throwing up lots of boundaries, they will end up being a barrier to connection. So any words you have about kind of that sweet spot where boundaries become a pathway to connection rather than being a barrier?
Yeah, so great. As you were saying, like if we set too many boundaries, I've seen this image of like two little castles with like big, huge walls, and moats, and dragons around them, and we're like sharing a house, but we're like two little castles with fortresses wrapped around us, and that's not ideal either. So yeah, I think there is that ability, and I think it takes self-awareness. It takes really doing the work to know your true self, which again, for some of us who've been in long-term relationships can get hard. Like, who am I? Like, who am I? How do I differentiate from my partner's values and needs? So I think that like number one is really doing some inner work where there's inquiry around like, what are my values distinct from my partner's? What are my needs distinct from my partner's? Who am I really now? We're always changing and evolving. So being willing, to even just like journal, maybe go away for a little weekend retreat somewhere or a week retreat if you can, and just like really be in some inquiry with our true selves. I think that's such an important piece. And you might come back to your partnership and say, hey, there are some boundaries I haven't been expressing. And your partner might get afraid, like, oh my gosh, you're now going to become a castle with a moat and a fortress in a relationship. And it's like, no, I love what you said. Like, we do need to be able to influence each other, but we also need to be able to honor each other's differences and be different. To truly have a long-term and healthy and thriving relationship. So I'll just add one little side thing. I was at a retreat center with like this world famous mindfulness teacher and his wife, and they bickered like every single day. They were just like fiery and they bicker at each other. And I was like, oh, and they shared that they have conflict every day, but they go into it and they just kind of like let it erupt. They don't hide from it. They just work through it. And even if they disagree, they both share their points and then they let it go. And I was like, oh my gosh, I love this. So I think like the modeling of I'm you, I'm me, I'm not you, I'm me, you're you. We can come together. We can have differences. We can even have boundaries. And we're here and we're able to support each other and connect and bend at certain times, but also have certain non-negotiables. So I guess that's the last point I'd make is like, as you do this deeper inner work, really ask yourself, like, what are my non-negotiables? And then what are the areas where I'm willing to be flexible at times? And I think those are two really important distinctions to make personally.
Absolutely. That is such a great invitation for people to do. There's so many nuggets here, Juna, for people to really begin reflecting within. And I just like, when I tune into people doing that, I just feel people bonding so much more with their own hearts and bodies and feelings and minds, like every part of them. And then we can share from that place, having that inner clarity. Just keeps things so much cleaner and clearer. And I'm so grateful for you, Juna. So 2 things. One, what would you say is a thriving relationship to you? So I love to ask people here on the Thriving Relationship Show, and you've shared so much about all these components to having a thriving relationship, but kind of the essence of it to you. What would it be?
I mean, I really think a thriving relationship is 2 people who are fully committed to truth, to honesty, transparency, and being their most authentic selves, and are fully committed to partnership, to going as deep together as they can. So yeah, I think that really is a thriving relationship, is like the commitment and that realness, that truth, and the commitment, the daily and active practice of that.
Well, I love that. I feel like the pairing of those things, like if we know our partner is fully committed and fully in it with us, like that's like the larger container that can then hold all the other things. So if we have fears of, oh, they might not love me anymore if I share this, or they might leave, or it might mean this thing, it's like having that greater security. I love that you mentioned both those things. That seems like the perfect marriage of those ingredients. So the second thing is for you to share how people can follow along and keep learning with you and from you. So can you share your website, any things you have coming up, how they can find you on social media? And of course, we'll link to everything below as well.
Yeah, they can just find me at junamustad.com, and my TED Talk is a mindful approach to anger, or sorry, anger is your ally, a mindful approach to anger. So they can check that out as well. And I will have a course coming up maybe in about 3 or 4 months on the People Pleaser's Guide to Anger. So I'll be doing that again this year, which will be really fun. So you can definitely check out that on my website too.
Amazing. Yes, be sure to follow along, Juna. The depth of your wisdom, your authenticity, your heart, your care, you really live it, and it shows. And it's so easy to connect with you because you bring all of you to your connections. And I just feel so honored that I've gotten to personally experience that, and that I've gotten to share just your gorgeous spirit with our community. So thank you so much for being here. I love you so dearly. Thank you all for being here and just growing and getting to know who you truly are, because a kind of partnership that's like 2 authentic humans coming together, then we can create something that is truly extraordinary and that is sustainable, and that will take us places beyond what we could even imagine. So thank you so much, Juna. Thank you, everyone. We will see you next time on the Thriving Relationship Show. Want more support for your relationship, or want to become trained as a certified relationship coach to help other couples? We warmly welcome you to head on over to centerthrive.com. Thank you so much, and I can't wait to see you next time on the Thriving Relationship Show.